I started this week being upset with Thomas Jefferson. In preparation for this sermon, I did some reading, and as Eric related, there's some pretty disturbing information that historians have gleaned for us about Jefferson and his actions during his lifetime. Profoundly disappointing to me was Jefferson's indebtedness at the end of his life. He eloquently wrote about the blessings of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but he was unable to provide those blessings for his slaves upon his death. Unlike George Washington, who not only freed those slaves belonging to him, about 124, but also paid for many of their care for decades after his death. Around 1811, Jefferson wrote a letter to his granddaughter, which contained a list of 12 canons of conduct in life, rules to live by, in essence. And in 1825, he sent the same list, minus 2 rules, to another relative's son. In both versions, the third rule is the same. Never spend your money before you have it. In the museum shop, copies of both versions are available for sale. And I remember seeing this very item framed in the gift shop at Ashland Island, of all places, and I had the same reaction you did. I remember laughing to myself. What a hypocrite. I have since learned that Jefferson's indebtedness was a more complicated matter. Monticello's website explains that Jefferson inherited a great deal of debt from his father-in-law, who died in 1774. Farming proved to be an unreliable and at times inadequate source of income. Jefferson himself was a major creditor, but payments owed to him were unreliable and inadequate as well. Jefferson famously lived beyond his means, though, spending large amounts of money on building projects, furnishings, wine, books, etc. The financial panic, which we would call a recession, that occurred in 1819, resulted in a drop in the value of his land holdings. Sound familiar? Later in life, he co-signed a loan for a longtime friend who died 2 years later, and Jefferson was forced to take on that unpaid debt. A cautionary tale, indeed. I suspect Jefferson knew he was a hypocrite when he wrote that canon, but he knew it was important to tell his descendants not to fall into the same traps that he himself had gotten into. Now, as the week went on, I began to realize that my disappointment in Jefferson was something deeper. My disappointment was reflecting a disappointment in myself. Like Jefferson, sometimes due to poor decisions, sometimes due to circumstances, my financial situation has also been problematic. As someone who wants to be financially responsible, I am ashamed to admit that there have been times when I've lived beyond my means, failed to plan for misfortune, failed to plan for the future, and took on too much debt. I don't know about you, but I didn't receive too much financial education growing up. In fact, I've come to believe that there was a conspiracy for us to be as financially illiterate as possible, so that we would get into debt and spend our lives paying interest to banks and credit card companies. Okay, maybe not a conspiracy, but it seems there was little constructive effort to help young people know how to manage money. The recent financial crisis demonstrated how banks and mortgage companies are able to take advantage of trusting people who don't understand the complexities or even the basics of finance. I am happy to report that Albemarle County Schools will require my son to take a personal finance class in high school. Jefferson would approve. So I try to teach my children about being responsible with money. They have bank accounts, they get allowance, they earn some money from babysitting and other jobs, and they save their money, they spend their money, and they have to keep track of it. I talk to them about fully paying off credit cards each month and how important it is to stay out of debt, save money, and live below your means. I need to continue to reinforce these canons. I haven't always lived by these canons. I, too, am a hypocrite. But I've learned through experience that I should have been living by them, and will work to live up to these canons myself going forward. Going beyond the ways we spend our money, perhaps we also need to consider how we make our money. Jefferson, of course, profited from slavery. Today we find that appalling. But are we profiting from activities that don't reflect our values? I've had on my to-do list for some time converting my retirement accounts into one that reflects the values of socially responsible investing. I met with a representative from the company who has my accounts who made this socially responsible investing idea sound terribly complicated and essentially not worth doing. I was told that if I don't want to invest in weapons manufacturers, for example, then I can put my money in another fund that is considered socially responsible, but includes soda manufacturers who are peddling highly processed, subsidized, high fructose corn syrup, which contributes to health problems all over the world. So if there's someone in our congregation who would offer an adult faith development class on socially responsible investigating, I would really appreciate it. Do you know what your retirement portfolio invests in? What do you want to invest in? What does our church endowment invest in? What do we want it to invest in? It's not easy stuff, but it's important if we take our values seriously. For me personally, I work in an office that processes funding from the Department of Defense, and yet I very much want peace. I know that some of the work that's done is to protect and help our men and women in uniform, but some may go towards technology used to wage war. At one time, I was concerned about it, but I honestly haven't thought about it for a long time. Let's say I was so concerned that I wanted to leave my job. How could I, given my current obligations, and a daughter soon to head up to college, and a son hoping to go off to school in 4 years? Now I'm starting to feel Jefferson's pain. The other profound disappointment I was having with Jefferson was his apparent loss of his idealism. As Eric noted, in the early versions of the Declaration of Independence, he spoke out against slavery and the slave trade. He even produced a draft document for the Constitution of Virginia that called for all slaves born after December 30th, 1800 to be free. But that fervor seems to have diminished over time, particularly as he began to notice how profitable slavery could be. He had determined that 2 months of labor by the 10 to 16-year-old boys making nails, boys that were whipped to get them to work, paid the grocery bill for his white family for the entire year. Jefferson even wrote to George Washington to tell him that he discovered he was making a 4% profit each year on the birth of black children. And he was encouraging others to invest in Negroes. How has our idealism diminished over time as we have become accustomed to the world as it is, as it profits us, not the world we want? Even as we are conscious of our UU value regarding the respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, including the environment, most of us are driving around in our fossil fuel-powered vehicles. Electric cars, which sound great, on the one hand, still largely require fossil fuels to make the electricity, plus the electricity to push the power through the grid to get to our houses, to get to our cars. A great answer, if we could really get it going, would be solar energy. We are modeling that here at TJMC. But on a large scale, we support massive subsidies like the Germans have put in place to put solar panels on homes and buildings. We get much more sunlight in the U.S. than Germany does. Our homes are largely powered by electricity created by fossil fuels. We burn natural gas, which is cleaner, but it's becoming more problematic due to methods of extraction and fracking. We would probably like to buy organic food grown sustainably by local farmers for our own health and for that the environment, but we have to decide for ourselves how important that value is. Are we willing to work a little harder to find that food? Maybe pay a little bit more? Are the items we purchase created by workers without adequate protections, who are overworked, underpaid, and ill-treated? In this complicated world of ours, it is hard not to be a hypocrite. Alas, there is something that continually gives me hope. Our church. It is a blessing to see so many people, particularly those in their later years, who have the energy and idealism to work for a world as they want it to be. It is truly inspiring. And our Unitarian Universalist movement gives me hope. Our movement is an idealistic one. Have you read our principles lately? There's one about how we have the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. We practically sound like Miss America contestants wanting world peace. And that's okay, because our principles are our highest ideals, and we're striving to meet, even if we may not always meet them. So, what is my disappointment with Jefferson? It still remains, as does my disappointment in myself. But I feel closer to Jefferson than I had before this week. In the end, what matters is what I do with what I think I know. Avoid unnecessary debt, live below my means, save for misfortunes in the future, be aware of how I earn and spend my money, hold on to my ideals, and help others enjoy the blessings of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Blessed you.